Stream only. We're good to go whenever you are.
Okay. Okay, good morning, councilors, SLT, and residents viewing. I see we have quorum this morning, so I call this regular council meeting for Wednesday, February 21st into session. And first thing we do is ask all those that can to please rise for the national anthem. Thank you. Next on the agenda is at this time we will have Councillor Hildebrand read the land recognition statement.
We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us of the great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Hildebrand, second by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that the agenda for the February 21st, 2024 regular meeting of council be adopted as circulated.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this item? Not seeing any. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. To you, Mr. Clerk.
Moving now to number 5. This is the opportunity for any disclosures of pecuniary interests.
After reviewing the agenda, does any council member have to disclose a pecuniary interest and general nature thereof? Not seeing any, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving now to item number 6. We're going to rise from council. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that council do now adjourn its meeting to sit as committee of the whole to facilitate a public meeting under the Development Charges Act. So we just need to vote on that.
I'm sorry.
We need to vote on that.
Any discussion on this item? Not seeing any. All those in favor? I see none opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So now moving into the public meeting, we have Mr. Byron Tan from Watson and Associates, and he's here to present an overview of the draft Development Charges Act update plan for the town of Pelham.
Okay, thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Tan, and you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. Good morning, members of council, members of the public, and staff. Happy to be here today to provide a public meeting presentation, which is mandatory under the Development Charge Act as part of your development charge background study process. So today I'll be going over, a few slides to go over the overview of the study process, some changes of the legislation, and then going over the draft, well, the calculated policies and all of the calculated rates for you to receive. So typically the format of a public meeting, we do have our opening remarks, which we just undertook. I'll go over the public meeting purpose, as well as the study process, timelines. We've worked with staff over the past year to undertake this background study. And then we'll go through the overview of how the development charges are calculated at a very high level. And then we'll go through, again, the proposed policies, the charges, and then any questions from either council or the public. So just to provide you some background, the purpose of the public meeting, is to provide, the mandatory public meeting for the development charge background study. It is a mandatory meeting that we are undertaking today, and it is actually here to be able to present the findings of the background study, which was released a minimum of 60 days before you could consider the bylaw. And you'll see as we go through the timeline that we've adhered to all the statutory dates that were required for this process. So just going through the study process and timeline, as I mentioned, we engaged with the town dating back to really the end of 2022. And the process essentially started with meeting with staff, meeting with the planning staff, all the other different departments to go over the calculations, growth forecasts, policies, et cetera. Throughout that time, we developed a number of items such as, your capital program, again, looking at the regional's growth forecast relative to what you are experiencing within the town. And we've all captured that as part of the development charge study, which was released on December 20th, 2023. And as you can see, we are before you today for the public meeting of council. And the next opportunity that we would be here in front of council is for the consideration of the bylaw on March 6th, which more than meets that 60-day minimum requirement of releasing the background study and council's consideration of the bylaw. So just to give you a little bit of background, for those of you, that may have not gone through this process for a while now or are new to the development charges. Development charges are a revenue tool to allow a municipality to recover for growth-related infrastructure costs related to residential and non-residential development. These capital costs are typically in addition to what you would already require developers to provide as part of a localized service. So for example, if a developer were to build a local subdivision, they would provide you with the local roads, local water mains, et cetera, and then you would assume it over time. The development charges would typically be a revenue tool for any infrastructure above and beyond the required works within those, outside those subdivisions, excuse me. And municipalities, you are empowered to have a development charge background study and bylaw. It's not mandatory. You don't have to have one. However, as you'll see in the next few slides, if you didn't have development charges, but you still had to pay for growth in terms of infrastructure, you would have to use other revenue tools such as your current rates, taxes, reserves. So this slide just provides you with a flavor of the different development charge eligible services that we can capture as part of the study, and these are all mandated under the Act. As you can see, there's 20 services on this page right now. However, there have been some changes with some legislation over the past year and a half, which many of you may know, Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act. And that's something where it actually removed the ability for municipalities to collect for housing services. Now, this doesn't impact the town, but however, the region used to provide development charges with housing included as part of the service. That's now been removed. But as you can see on the screen, of the remaining 19 services, the ones that we did focus on as part of this DC process are your typical water, wastewater, services related to a highway, which is really your roads, sidewalks, street lights, as well as public works, facilities, fleet, equipment. And then we also included fire protection services, library services, and parks and recreation. So there were a number of changes to the Development Charge Act dating back to 2016. And actually, most recently, we undertook a development charge update study for the town back in 2021. So the following bills that you'll see and the acts that you're seeing on the screen here, we've already included them as part of your current development charge bylaw. And that includes Bill 108, 138, 197, and 213. I'm saying the bill numbers. I know they recycle bill numbers. However, it's much easier than saying the whole name of the bill for each one. But essentially, these bills introduced a number of changes to the Development Charge Act, such as timing of payments, additional definitions, additional exemptions, treasurer statements, etc. So these were all captured as part of your current development charge background study that you currently that you have in place. However, since the completion of your prior study in 2021, there have been a couple of bills that were released, and most notably, as I mentioned, Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, and Bill 134, which amended Bill 23 to some degree, and I'll show you that in the next few slides. With respect to Bill 23, the province actually released this bill on October 25th, 2022. And as you can see, it received royal assent on November 28, 2022. So just a month and 3 or 4 days, essentially. So a lot of changes were happening here, which all municipalities within Ontario had to react to. And the next few slides will actually outline some of the changes that really affect the town in terms of development charges. As I said, this piece of legislation affected a number of items. So not only the Development Charge Act, but also the Planning Act, as well as 7 other pieces of legislation. And at the end of the day, it does have a negative impact towards your revenue collections from the development charge study, as well as parkland, or if you were to undertake a community benefits charge, which is another revenue tool. Those have all been affected by Bill 23. So I just want to go through some of the changes to provide you a little bit of an overview of what has transpired since November 2022. And I'll start actually at the bottom of the list here. So these are exemptions that are currently in force, and we have provided them as items within your draft bylaw that you'd be considering during your next council meeting. And the ones in green, these are currently in force. So the first one is inclusionary zoning units. So if you were to undertake any inclusionary bylaws and there would be affordable housing units within these areas, these items would be exempt from development charges. Nonprofit housing, you used to be able to collect for nonprofit housing, and if you recall what I just mentioned in the prior slide, one of the bills actually allowed you to have a timing of payment provision. So non-for-profit housing, they were actually allowed to pay their development charges over a period of 20 years, so 21 installments. As of November 28, 2022, nonprofit housing, as defined by the Act, is now 100% exempted from development charges. So if you did have any nonprofit housing that was, providing or paying the town with development charges, dating back to 2022, 2021, as of November 2022, those payments stop. And then obviously anything moving forward would be 100% exempt. And then the additional residential unit exemptions, these have actually already been in place, within the Development Charge Act. However, there was a couple of revisions to how it was worded as part of the Development Charge Act and the associated regulations. So what I mean by that is historically, if you were, let's say, having a single detached unit, you were allowed to add up to 2 additional apartments as long as you don't more than double the size of the home, and then that would be exempt from DCs. Well, they've removed that qualifier on that latter part of more than doubling the size of the home. So now it just says you can add 2 additional units. So that's something where there's minor changes there, but we did include those as part of your draft bylaw. And then going up to the top part in orange, these are additional exemptions that municipalities will have to provide. However, they are not currently in force until the province releases bulletins and subsequent regulations to define these. And the first ones, I'll start with the affordable units, which are broken down into the owned units and rental units. So historically, during Bill 20, just the original Bill 23, the definitions for these would be, affordable if they met the definition of being a purchase price or average rent that's less than the 80% of market value. That's now been revised by Bill 134 to essentially have an income qualifier to it. So as you can see on the screen, there is now an income qualifier where, if you own the unit or rent the unit, it must cost, or the rent must cost less than 30% of the 60th percentile of the income, for those particular units. Now, this is going to be, something that we are still waiting on with the regulations and the bulletin to further define. So until that time, these are not in effect yet. But one of the things that we will be monitoring is how will that average, income or average rent be defined? Because as let's say for the town of Pelham, you have a couple of major urban nodes, with Fenwick and Fonthill. So will it be just an average of the whole town? Would it be by area? If you have a municipality like, say, Lincoln or Oakville, I mean, they have, anywhere from 5 to 7 different urban areas. So is it all an average within the town, or, and for a matter of fact, would it be an average for the region? We don't know yet. So these are some things that we are monitoring. And once we find that out, we will keep council and staff apprised of the information. And then lastly, the last exemption on this list is attainable units. Again, these are to be defined by the bulletin. However, the preliminary definitions that we did receive are that they are not affordable units, and they must be sold to a person who is at arm's length from the seller. So again, it's very, a general definition, so it's not clearly defined. So this is something that, we are waiting for the province to provide additional information on. But until that time, these exemptions are currently not in force. Now, I would note that for these units, these affordable and attainable units, the municipality shall enter into an agreement with the, with the properties, for these affordable and attainable units to ensure that they remain in these criterias for a period of 25 years. So the moment that, a property is sold and it's no longer considered affordable, there should be a mechanism that you should be able to go back and collect DCs. We just don't know how that mechanism will work. So we are still waiting for those items to be released. So in addition to those exemptions, there's additional discounts and other revenue reductions that came from Bill 23. Rental housing. So if you do have a purpose-built rental unit or a rental building where all the units within that building are for rent, then you do get a discount to the development charges. And what you're seeing on the screen here is a range of discounts that you would get. So if you're a one-bedroom rental unit, then you would get a 15% discount on your development charges. If you're 2 bedrooms, you get a 20% discount. And then 3 bedrooms, you get a 25% discount. So more bedrooms, the higher the range on the discount. And then furthermore, there's additional revenue reductions, again, by virtue of the loss of a service. They remove the ability for municipalities to collect for housing, so social housing or anything like that. There are a couple of capital costs that are no longer eligible to be collected under the development charges. And the restrictions are with respect to studies and with land. So with studies, typically these are the ones where it'd be more your official plan, master plans. Unfortunately, all those the type of studies, they're no longer eligible for development charge, recovery. However, with land, the province has not prescribed which services relate to which land would no longer be eligible under the development charges. So while we are still waiting for the rules and which services that applies to, so at this time, until the province releases a a bulletin or a regulation to say X land, whether it's roads or Parks and Rec, or sorry, Parks and Rec's already excluded, but library, etc. Until they say otherwise, we are monitoring the inclusion of land at this point. And then the largest deduction right now that municipalities are facing is the mandatory phase-in of the development charges. So one of the items that was brought forth by Bill 23 was if you were to pass a new bylaw or any bylaw that would have came into effect as of Jan 1, 2022, you must phase in the maximum calculated rates. So at this point in time, if you were, let's say, to pass a $10,000 charge, day one, it then drops down to $8,000, so 80%. However, this does increase every year. So, on the anniversary year of the bylaw, year 2, then you go up to 85%, then 90, 95, until year 5 where you get to 100% of the implemented amount. Now, keep in mind, while you do have to adhere to the phase-in, you are still allowed to index your charge. So every year, we are allowed to include inflationary factors. We do track the non-residential building construction price index, which essentially states what the inflation rate would be for your development charge bylaw. And then lastly, for some municipalities, this may be a revenue reduction, but the historical levels of service. So, typically when we do the development charge background study and all the calculations, we have a calculation called a service standard. And those service standards used to look at a 10-year period, historical period of what you historically provided, because that mathematical calculation then says if this is your level of service, then your forecast population would be the average of what you provided in the past. However, that 10-year examination is now a 15-year. So for some municipalities that may have different type of growth trajectories, especially in those beginning 5 years, that may have a downward pressure on that calculation, depending on whether it's a fast growth or a slow growth municipality. So just wanted to point that out. However, I would like to note that the province did release a news article back on December 13th, 2023, so just a couple of months ago, essentially stating that they will be examining, a couple of the items from Bill 23, most notably the eligibility of studies, as well as the mandatory phase-in. So we are, monitoring the outcome of those discussions. And, should anything change, we will keep staff and council apprised of that information and make any adjustments necessary to your bylaw, should that come to pass. And then lastly, for Bill 23, there are some DC administrative items now need to be adhered to. Historically, you were allowed to include interest costs to those annual payments, or if you recall, kind of like that non-for-profit or rental housing or institutional. If they were paying annual installments, you were allowed to add interest to them. Similarly, if you have any applications through site plan or zoning bylaw amendment, the DC rates are frozen for a period of 2 years. Again, this was captured in your 2021 DC study. You were allowed to include interest costs to them, where you would define what that interest cost is through an interest policy, which you do have. However, with the changes of Bill 23, they have now prescribed a maximum interest rate that can be applied, which is the average prime rate plus 1% of the large banks. So we do monitor this. And again, this is a maximum. So if your interest rate policy is lower than the maximum, obviously you continue status quo. But if it's higher, then you can only charge a maximum that's prescribed in the Act. There is a requirement for the treasurer to allocate at least 60% of the monies that are collected in the prior calendar year for water, wastewater, and services related to highway. So allocate does not mean spend. It just means you're earmarking that collected money towards noted projects. And it doesn't have to be a project that's going to be undertaken this year. It could be a future project within the capital forecast as well. So again, that's something that the treasurer and the finance staff just have to undertake at the beginning of the year when they undertake the treasurer statements, for the province. But again, it's just allocating for these 3 services. And then lastly, the development charge bylaw has been extended from a 5-year useful life to a 10-year useful life. Now, I would just, caveat that where, while you are able to undertake a DC bylaw every 10 years, we have noticed that, especially this last few years through COVID, the indexing or that inflationary factor that you are allowed to apply to your development charge bylaw is not keeping up with your actual tenders or your cost of construction and cost of purchases. So, the longer you wait, there is that gap that may potentially be created, by waiting the full 10 years. But again, this is something that, staff should monitor, because if you are keeping up with the, with inflation as well as your tenders, then really there's no reason to open it up at that time. Just to provide you a little bit of a flavor of the DC methodology that we use for the background study. Again, we've simplified it into 6 steps. However, if you ever read the Development Charge Act, there's over 80 clauses, hundreds of subclauses. It's very good reading at night if you need to. Essentially, going down the list here, I mean, the main point of the methodology is to identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So this is where we work with the town or other municipalities to identify, the growth forecasts, where are we growing, and then the type of growth as well. Is it singles, multiples, apartments, non-residential, etc. From there, we then work with staff to determine what are the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So, this is now where we go in and say, well, based on, the developments, we need, X amount of capacity in the roads, or we need additional parks and recreation space, library, fire protection, etc. So once you identify and establish what those servicing needs are, number 3 then goes to say, well, what capital do I need to meet those needs? So, for example, if we need additional fire protection, that may come in the form of a vehicle. Well, what type of vehicle? Is it going to be a pumper tanker? Is it going to be an aerial? So now you have the ability to pick the capital to meet that servicing need. But then once you, once you identify those costs, there are a number of deductions we must adhere to, as part of the development charge study. And those deductions come from the form of grants, subsidies, maybe other contributions, whether from the region, other, partners, or even the development community. There is also a deduction with respect to the benefit to the existing developments. So, for example, if there are any existing facilities that you currently have, but you were about to build a facility that's double the size, then technically you already had a facility that was, let's say, 5,000 square feet. So really, if you're going to 10,000, that first 5,000 should really be a benefit to existing because you already provided that at that point in time. So if you demolish it, build a 10, there should be a 50% deduction at minimum. And then lastly, we do have a couple of items here with respect to the 15-year historical service calculation. As I mentioned, those service standards, they provide a ceiling or a cap as to what you can collect for certain services. This does not apply to water, wastewater, or stormwater for the town. So these, these service standard calculations really only apply to your roads, public works, parks and recreation, library, and fire. And then from one bylaw to the other, if you have any reserve fund balances, with respect to your DCs, they would be applied and deducted from the capital program. Similarly, if you have any DC deficits where you've advanced monies and funding and maybe you've taken on debt and your reserve funds are now in a negative position, you are allowed to then put that negative balance as a collection because now that's an item that you have cash flowed, whether through other sources. And then finally, once we have that net amount, we then allocate it between residential and non-residential developments. Once we're allocating the two, which is typically done whether it's on a population to employment basis or any other metric that we would deem appropriate, we then take those costs and divide it by the growth in those categories. So typically, with the residential, we divide it by the number of individuals that would be forecasted in the planning period. And then similarly with the non-residential, we typically divide it by the forecasted square footage. So just to give you a little bit of a summary, from that, from those steps, we identify the cost of infrastructure, and that's our numerator. And then we divide that into the residential and non-residential growth to give us your residential charge, which we typically provide on different unit types, whether it's singles and semi-detached, townhouses, apartments, and then as well on the non-residential, we typically look at it from a per square foot or per square meter basis. So I'll touch upon the exemptions briefly. I've talked about most all the ones in orange, but there are other exemptions that are mandatory that you must provide under the Development Charge Act. There is this exemption on the upper and lower tier governments and school boards. So if Niagara region were to build a facility within Pelham, you wouldn't charge them a DC. Likewise, if you're building a facility, you don't pay the region's DC. The school boards, since they're under the province, they're higher on the pecking order, so they don't pay the DCs as well. And then industrial building expansions. Industrial buildings are allowed to expand up to 50% of their gross floor area. and do not have to pay a DC for that expanded amount. Now, we do ensure that there is a timeline to this and a start date, which is written in your bylaw, so that this type of exemption, doesn't get overutilized. So you don't want someone coming in with a 50% increase, going from 100 to 150, the year after going from 150 to 225, and going in perpetuity. So it is truly a one-time exemption that you provide. And then there's the development of lands intended to be used, on universities' lands that receive operating funding from upper levels of government. So this is a new exemption that we did include as part of your current 2021 bylaw, and we are continuing that here. And then, as I mentioned, all the ones in orange I touched upon earlier. And further to that, there are discretionary exemptions that council can elect to add in addition to the noted mandatory exemptions. So council can reduce the charge in whole or in part, for different types or classes of developments. So for example, you may exempt, places of worship and churches altogether, or you can have a reduced charge for any other category that you'd like, whether it's industrial, commercial, etc. So you have the ability to do so. You may phase in the charge over time. However, as you know, the province has mandatorily put that for you. But if you'd like to phase in the charge even more than the mandatory 80%, you have the ability to do so. And then there's redevelopment credits. These are not discussed within the Development Charge Act, but it is provided under case law through the previous OMB, now the OLT. Where if my house burnt down, knock on wood, hopefully it doesn't, I should be allowed a period of time to rebuild my home and not have to pay a DC. Likewise, if I have, let's say, 3 single detached homes and I want to knock them down and build, let's say, a commercial plaza, I should be allowed to get a DC credit for what was there existing. So again, I could knock down the 3 homes, those 3 homes times your single detached rate. That would be what I would subtract off of the commercial rate that I'm building, for that plaza. So it's just one minus the other. So the town's current discretionary exemptions, as you're seeing on the screen here, we have proposed to continue them as part of their bylaw. But again, this is an opportunity for council and staff to, visit this. But as of right now, we are still maintaining the places of worship, hospitals, garden suites, farm help house, farm buildings, institutions, as you can see here, the housing services, fixed long-term care, and then Mental Health Care Act. And then any, land developed for the purpose where development is clearly exempt from taxation. So these are your current exemptions right now within your bylaw, and we have written them into your draft bylaw as well to be continued. Now, as part of all of our background studies, we do include a local service policy. And under Section 59 of the Act, it does specify that there can be no additional levies that are imposed on developments. So what this means is, there is a need to have a local service policy that clearly defines what is the developer's responsibility of, construction versus what you would include as part of the development charge study. So if you look at Appendix E of our background study, it will clearly define what would be an expectation or developer responsibility to construct within their subdivisions, such as your local roads, local parks and recreation, local water mains, etc. And then anything over and above a certain threshold or certain criteria, that is the type of item that we would include within the development charge study. So this is all included as part of the report. And as I mentioned, there's been no changes to this local service policy. We have worked with staff and the development community historically in the prior DC bylaws. And seeing as the local service policy has been performing well, we've made no changes at this time. Now, I've already touched upon this earlier, but there is that relationship between new funding and development charges and growth. So if you do have growth, obviously you need new infrastructure to be able to service that growth. And there's only a handful of ways to be able to fund that infrastructure. You can either have development charges, which again, are not mandatory, but you do have them, and a number of municipalities have them as well. Or if you don't have that, then really, in order to service those new growth and users, you are relying on rates, taxes, reserves, user fees, etc. When you rely on that right-hand side, though, now you're including all of the existing population, whether it's the existing residents, existing businesses, to contribute towards these new infrastructure costs. So that's where there's the balancing act of what would be in the DC versus what would be funded from all your other revenue tools. Now, we're just going into the specifics of the study. However, what we have here on the screen is your housing forecast for the town of Pelham. What you're seeing here, again, is a forecast going out to 2051, which for the most part matches the information that was undertaken by the region through the regional OP process, as well as looking at, the type of developments that would be incurred, or at least proposed to be incurred, within the town over the next, call it 27 years to 2051. So what you'll see here in the black, this is your historical building permit activity. As you can see, you have your peaks and valleys. At your lowest point back in 2013, you had about 29 building permits. But as you can see, if you walk out the door, you have quite a bit of development. You even had a peak of 330, back in 2021. So on average, you were looking at just under 150 units per year. That's that red line that you're seeing on the left-hand side. And again, going through the work, with town staff, the planners, and again, working with the numbers that the region has provided, the growth forecast here, as you can see, provides an average of about, that 150 to 145 units per year for the first, 5 to 10 years, and then slowly cascades down to about 120 units per year near the end of the forecast. Now, again, this is a forecast, so you will have years that'll be much higher, much lower. And we do have a target to the end of 2051, but for illustrative purposes, we've just, for the most part, kept it average across the time horizon. What you're seeing as well, in that darker blue, that's your low density. So that would represent really your singles and semi-detached units. The medium density in that lighter blue is your townhomes, back-to-back townhomes, et cetera. And then the yellow on the top, that's your high density. So that's more so your apartments and then, smaller unit types. Just to look at it from a numerical perspective, as you can see over the 10-year forecast, you are estimated to grow by just under 3,100 people over that 10 years, which translates to about 1,547 residential units, or 363,000 square feet of non-residential gross floor area. Now, going out to 2051, there are slightly some differences between the two 2051 numbers. One looks at what would potentially be serviced with water and wastewater, and one does not. So your long-term 2051, we are looking at roughly 3,939 units, just under 8,600 people, and that's about 961,000 square feet of building space. And then on the water and wastewater serviced units, that's also around the 3,900, but slightly lower, and just over 600,000 square feet of non-residential. I already mentioned this earlier, but the services that we have included as part of this development charge background study are your fire services, services related to highway, which is your roads and related, public works, parks and recreation, library, water, and wastewater. Your current development charges right now, as of Jan 1, 2024, are as follows. As you can see, you do have a number of categories here. As I mentioned, you have your residential and non-residential. So you can see for a fully serviced unit that would receive water and wastewater, say in the areas of Fonthill or Fenwick, we're looking at a charge of roughly $29,240. If you're outside that service area, it's actually that that first subtotal, which denotes $23,555. And as you can see, the smaller the unit size, the smaller the charge. So when you go to the townhouses or the multiples, that's at $20,830. And then once you get to the two different size apartments, it's just $20,019. $12,242 for a one-bedroom or studio apartment. And then your special care dwellings. These are typically your dwellings that would be more, say in a retirement home or, one of those institutional type units where it's, helping individuals out, with residential needs, that's just under $10,000 per, really it's on a per unit or per bed basis. And then in non-residential, we do have one category for all non-res, and that's at $13.47 for a fully serviced non-residential building. In terms of the calculations, again, we've worked with staff over the past year and a bit to formulate all of the capital and all of the needs going out to 2051. And that translates to a total charge of $37,707. Again, this reflects all of the increase in costs in tenders, all of your updated estimates, as well as the updated growth forecasts. And as you can see, moving from left to right, your multiples, again, the smaller the unit, smaller the number of people, relates to the charges. So we're at 28,264. And then, with the apartments, 26,500 and just over 17,200 on the studio and one bedroom. And then similarly for that special care, we're now at 14,386, and your non-residential is $17.23 per square foot. Now, keep in mind that these rates are subject to that 80% phase-in. So if council were to elect to pass these rates in its entirety, day one of that bylaw, these rates drop to 80% of the totals. So in terms of the rate comparison here, as you can see, the current charges right now are at $29,240. The calculated amounts would get you to $37,707 for a single detached and semi. Now, with that 80% phase-in, your first year is actually at $30,166. So just about $900 more than your current charge currently that's being imposed. With respect to the non-residential rate comparison, as you can see, I had noted that your current charges are at $13.47 per square foot. The calculated amounts are at $17.23, and the 80% phase-in of the charges get you down to $13.78. So again, about 31-cent increase from your current charges. Now, in terms of a survey of the residential municipalities within Niagara region, as you can see here, the pink is your current charges. The dark blue is where the calculated amounts would be, and then the light blue is where you would be following the implementation of the bylaw. So as you can see, you are just underneath Lincoln. They're also undertaking a process as well. So as both of you are undertaking your processes, you pretty much don't move in ranking at the end of the day. And what I would just like to say is all of the stars that you're seeing at the bottom, these are all municipalities that are undertaking their development charge study or will be expiring over the next year. So there will be a shift in the this survey once all those other municipalities have undertaken their processes. Similarly, again, with the commercial square feet, you're just underneath Welland, and even with the calculated and the current and the 80% phase-in, you're not moving in ranking at all. But as I mentioned, all the other ones to the right of you, they are all undertaking a DC process. So we are waiting to see, where they would land at the end of the day. And then lastly, with industrial, again, similar to the res and non-res, this survey, the lower tier and upper tier, which is the region. And right now on the industrial side, you are still, in the same position that you are historically. And that concludes my presentation. Just wanted to summarize that, as part of this process, we have completed the mandatory public meeting under the Act. And the next time we'll be in front of council is for the consideration of the bylaw, which is on March 6th. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this would be an opportunity for the members to ask any questions for clarification of Mr. Tan on the draft study.
Excellent. If I may begin, Mr. Tan. sorry, of DC rates, commercial, and you have kind of broken it down even more specifically, like Thorold, Rolling Meadows. And then why did you pick as opposed to going citywide, why would you have taken that to a specific Rolling Meadows? What was the reason for that?
Excellent question, through the mayor. Actually, we have Thorold, the citywide, as well as Rolling Meadows on there. So typically, if there is a municipality that has, let's say, an area-specific rate, it is, we find it appropriate to include it as part of the survey, because then you're able to see the town-wide or citywide rate, as well as any area specifics that would, maybe perhaps have a differentiated charge. Because again, each area is unique. So it is something that, we've included here for illustrative purposes.
Okay, so more or less just to show the spread between the two areas. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Eckert.
Thank you for your presentation. Just one quick question to clarify on the discounts, 80, 85, 90, 95 to 100. So if somebody comes in year one, they get the discounted rate of 80%. In year two, are they charged additional to get to 85, or is that for new people coming in the next year would be charged 85, and then in the third year, people get charged 90? How does that work?
Excellent question, through the mayor. So in terms of the mandatory phase-in and how you implement your development charges, the development charges are a one-time fee. So any developments or building permits that are applied in that year one, they would be subject to an 80% rate of your maximum calculated charge. Any building permits that are pulled in year two, they would be subject to then 85%. So you don't go back and add another 5% to the ones that took out a building permit the year prior.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Olson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I think it was page 8, you mentioned something about revenue tools, and I didn't hear what you said there around that. I missed that.
Through the mayor, I think you're just talking about, I think I just mentioned that you have the ability to have different revenue tools to be able to fund growth-related infrastructure, which the DCs being your primary source. Okay. Some municipalities that have more high-rise or high-density developments, such as apartment units that have 5 stories or 10 residential units within them, they'll have the ability to impose a community benefits charge, which is another revenue tool to be able to collect for growth-related works. And then as well, you also have your other revenue tools, such as, through the Planning Act, you have your parkland dedication, in order to purchase new parkland, and then obviously you have your rates, taxes, et cetera. So I was just trying to break down the different buckets that you could draw on in order to fund growth-related capital projects.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Mayor, through you, I was wondering, we had a certain amount of administrative expense because of the growth in the town. Is administrative expense covered at all, or is that calculated in the calculation?
Through the mayor, if it is tied to a project where, obviously there's the cost of labor, the cost of construction, and all of the associated costs in order to denote a capital project, then that would be included. But if it's truly operating, such as, salaries for staff or anything like that, that is not included in the calculations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Olson. Councillor Kerr.
Yes, I just want to, for clarification, so we go through multiple bylaws, zonings, and changes and things, but the development charges only hit once the permit application has come in and been accepted. I'm just trying to figure out what the target date is. I'm thinking we have a lot of things that are unbuilt at the moment, but do the charges come into play once the shovel hits, I guess the shovel hits the ground kind of thing?
Excellent question. Through the mayor. So development charge, as I mentioned earlier, is a one-time fee, and it's typically imposed at the time of a building permit application. However, council does have the ability, through the Development Charge Act, to enter into any prepayment agreements or late payment agreements as well. So you do have the ability to stage the timing as long as there's an agreement in place. But typically, it is imposed at the time of building permit.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions on the presentation? Not seeing any. Turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we do have two individuals that have identified that they'd like to speak to the report, and I think Mr. Tan will stick around to answer any questions that they might have. The first one is going to join us virtually. That's Mr. Stephen Kaiser, and we'll just give Sarah a second to bring him into the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Stephen, we see that you're unmuted. You may begin.
Good, can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you, and thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Kaiser.
Sorry, the sun's just coming up here and the lighting's not that good, but I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you remotely. So, Mr. Mayor and members of council, and I haven't spoken at a public meeting in a long time. Just being a little facetious. But I'm speaking to you today on behalf of our company, Kaiser and Associates. We've been building in the town for 38 years. I'm speaking on behalf of Niagara Innovative Living. You understand that we're a joint venture partner with the development at 105 Welland Road. And I'm also speaking to you on behalf of the Mountain View Building Group. We're in a joint venture on a property in Fonthill also. I acknowledge the letters sent by Mr. Vaca on behalf of the Mountain View Building Group, and I certainly fully endorse the letter as past president of the Niagara Home Builders Association and the Ontario Home Builders Association, the letter sent by Chuck McShane from the Niagara Home Builders Association. The calculation of DC is a complicated exercise, as you've seen today in the presentation from the gentleman from Watson Associates. I just want to relay a little bit of my past experience with development charges, a brief explanation of the concerns that we have as a group of the proposed bylaw, and some suggestions regarding the process. A little bit of storytelling. Back in 1997, I was president of the Urban Development Institute. And at that time, the then government was going to revise the Development Charges Act. I struck up a friendship with a gentleman by the name of Terry Mundell, who was then president of AMO, and we decided that we'd go to the minister and see if we could convince them that as an industry working with AMO, we could come up with a framework for a Development Charges Act. We met with Minister Leach, and he was thrilled with the idea and sent us on our way and gave us 6 months to come back with the framework, which we did. And the government then in 1997 adopted the new Development Charges Act, which essentially is the framework of what you're discussing today. That new DC came into effect. Municipalities across the GTA came forward with their new DCs. Most of those studies were done by Watson Associates. And then we as a group negotiated and worked with the various municipalities in terms of their studies and things that we saw that maybe could be taken out of the charge, et cetera, et cetera. And we managed collectively as an organization working together to negotiate $50 million off the table in terms of what was in those bylaws across the GTA. As I said, many of those bylaws were done by Watson Associates, and they certainly are experts in their field. They do it for many, many municipalities. Our company was in partnership with CM Watson and Associates, or now Watson Associates, in the early 2000s in a company called Innovative Partnerships, where we were working with municipalities to find efficiencies in their operations and bring some money back to the municipality. So the key to understanding or critiquing the DC bylaw is what is the allocation of costs and what are those costs, what's behind those costs exactly. This process is not new, and as I said in a previous public meeting, I've dealt with 9 different councils. Certainly, we've dealt with a host of different DC bylaws as they've come forward. Probably one of the largest being the one at the region, and a number of times I've worked with the region as part of a group, but we've worked before the DC bylaw was presented on the front end as opposed to now a public meeting and here it is. But nevertheless, we are where we are, so I'm making this presentation to you today. But I will tell you that the process before, there's been a lot more front-ending before we actually get to a public meeting and working with the industry back and forth. So reviewing the town's proposed bylaw, I look first at what were the big cost items, so to speak, and those are Parks and Recreation, as the consultant noted, at $11,412, and those charges related to roads at $14,107. So those are all components that make up what is the charge. Speaking first of Parks and Rec, if you go through the background study and look at the line items, the benefit to existing is essentially zero in most of the line items, if not almost all, and most of the cost is 100% related to growth. I understand with parks, when there's a new park in a new community, yes, the money needs to be there for those park facilities. But some of the items, of the $20 million that's in parks, so to speak, 15 is growth related. 15 million is growth related. I know later in your agenda, you're speaking to the Centennial Park washrooms. That is a line item, an $800,000 line item. No benefit to existing ratepayers in that line item, 100% charge to new growth. It's just something to think of. And there's $850,000 on top of that allocated to the Centennial Park. In terms of roads, it's a big number, $75 million approximately, and not one new road being built in the town. There is an extension of Station Street. I acknowledge that and certainly have questions in regards to that. But $50 million of that 75 is growth related. And I said, not one road. And you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Kerr, and we've all been driving these, number of other members of council, we've been driving these same roads since we got our license 50 years ago. And now they need to be urbanized. I think if we drive through town, we'll see a number of roads that should have been urbanized years ago that haven't been urbanized. Station Street is a key one. 100 years ago, there were trains going down Station Street to the station at the old Fawn Hill Lumber. That Station Street still has ditches on both sides that go nowhere in some cases. We own a piece of property that's related to that. And now we call for reconstruction of Station Street, a capital cost of $3.6 million, $1 million of that going to existing ratepayers, and $2.5 million going to new growth. I question that. There's a school, a church, development already on the side, and now $2.5 million are going to be picked up by new growth. Also, if we're looking at roads, there's a provisional item of $5 million. I don't think the town has a $5 million provisional item in their budget, but I stand to be corrected. Often we don't have a clear picture of what the impact of development charges is on affordability, the cost of housing. Well, I'll just paint you a picture for Font Hill. New front foot prices now in Font Hill are coming close to $10,000 a front foot. So if we have a 50-foot lot, that's $500,000. If we factor in the town's parkland dedication at 5%, that's another $25,000. If we factor in the region's development charge, that's another $25,000. If we factor in the town's proposed development charge, that's another $37,000. So in fact, if someone was to buy a lot and walk in to get a building permit, they'd need $500 to buy the lot and another $88,000 to pay those charges before they even paid for the building permit. So we question affordability, but sometimes we look at these charges in isolation and we don't really understand the full impact of what exactly development charges do to housing affordability. I'd just like to compare the city of Welland next door. Although the legislation and the consultant will say those are all silos, so they're different service levels, and you only look at them in graphs, they're certainly not how you determine your service level in your municipality. But there are some vast differences. So in the current Welland DC right now, for a single-family home, the road component is $3,954. In Pelham, the proposed road component is $14,107. The Parks and Recreation component in Welland is $1,000. In Pelham, it is $11,412. The current proposed DC, or current Welland DC, for a single-family home in that 50-foot lot we spoke of, is $7,722. The proposed DC today is $37,707, or almost 5 times greater than that of Welland. I'll give you a recent story, and I'm going to try and sum it quick, but our company developed recently 6 lots on Lookout Street. You can drive by them. Probably the houses are all built now. Homes by Hendricks built the homes. And probably there's, through the 6 lots, another $10 million in assessment. When we came to develop the lots, the town staff said, well, we want the road urbanized. So, okay, let's figure out how we urbanize the road. So the cost to urbanize the road was about $420,000. We were one side, the other side was the golf course driving range. So the town said, well, we'll pick up the other half, you pay for your half. So we did the work, paid the full bill, and the town, as promised, did pay their half. But their half was allocated to new growth in a development charge, $210,862. That money should have been allocated to existing residents because they gain the benefit of this new urbanized road. Is interest, when we came to settling the costs, probably a year or 2 after that discussion, the staff member, in realizing that the town was going to have to pay, said, if I realized that we were going to pick up the tab, I never would ask for half of those things. That was quite unnerving, but that is the sad story. So the new DC proposes increases of, in singles, 22% or $8,467, multiples 26%, apartments, 2-bedroom 24%, and we go all the way up to special care dwellings at 30%. And I realize there's a phase in, and certainly there's a phase in, but certainly that is a huge increase. All of this when the industry is definitely in a recession and a slowdown. The town relies on DC money for the community center, and the provincial government's pushing for more housing to be built and housing affordability. The town, you as a council, struggled to find a 4% tax increase for ratepayers. This industry's been a partner with your town for years, building the communities that you now drive around and see. And I'd ask that we go back to the table and work to figure out something that's reasonable in terms of the DC increase. I'm somewhat shocked that council has now, for consideration of the bylaw, the date of March 6th. There's been zero consultation with the industry, zero front-end consultation, as far as I understand, and a time frame of a matter of weeks to figure out what the end bylaw will look like. So I have to say, I think the town's procedure is flawed, not just in this. You're later in this meeting discussing the housekeeping bylaw for the zoning for the town. I've spoken twice at public meetings. I shouldn't have had to speak at a public meeting. We should have figured this all out. And what is being considered later on your agenda is still flawed. So I would ask Mr. Mayor and members of council, this process of work time and time again, but involves the industry sitting down with town staff and working through this and coming up with something that we can collectively support. We know there's going to be an increase, but some of these things that are added in here need to be discussed, perhaps taken out of the bylaw or allocated differently to existing taxpayers. And that's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiser, for again joining us this morning and for your thoughts. Turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So now moving to our next presenter, delegate request is Mr. John Langendoon.
Okay, Mr. Langendoen, thank you for joining us this morning and taking time away from your business that's starting to boom this time of year, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and members of staff. I'm speaking on behalf of the Pelham Greenhouse Growers Group. My name is John Langendoon, and I'm also one of the growers in the growers group. Speaking to development charges, just got wind of it yesterday, and is understood from the Watson February 21st, 24 report to council and the proposed DC bylaw appendix to December 20th, 2023 background study that a number of current discretionary exemptions are intended to continue, including those granted for farm buildings. The Pelham Greenhouse Growers Group supports this proposal, recognizing that greenhouses are captured under the definition of farm buildings as follows. Farm building means a building or structure that is integral to an agricultural use, including barns, silos, or other similar buildings or structures, but excludes residential uses and marijuana production facilities. Agricultural use means agricultural use as defined in the zoning bylaw. Zoning bylaw 4481 defines agricultural use as the use of land, buildings, or structures for the growing of crops, including nursery, biomass, and horticultural crops, raising of livestock, raising of other animals for food, fur, or fiber, including poultry and fish, aquaculture, apiaries, agroforestry, maple syrup production, and associated on-farm buildings and structures, including but not limited to livestock facilities, manure storages, value retaining facilities, and includes a farm building and accommodation for full-time farm labor when the size and nature of the core operation requires additional employment. On this basis, it is our understanding that greenhouses are covered under farm buildings and will continue to be exempt from development charges. If this interpretation is incorrect, or if the town proposes to vary from this historical interpretation, please advise to undersign as soon as possible. Thank you for the opportunity to reply to this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Langendoen. As we usually do, we'll hear all presenters, then we'll go back and ask questions. Okay, yep, thanks, John. And I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out that we do have two pieces of written correspondence that have been circulated to council and will become part of the public record. The first is from Sullivan Mahoney on behalf of the Mountain Building Group, and the second is from Chuck McShane on behalf of the Niagara Home Builders Association. So this would be the opportunity if the committee has any other questions, either to the presenters this morning, staff, or Mr. Tan from Watson and Associates.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Clerk. Any council members? And I see Councilor Nisnik.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. So just a clarification, I guess, from Mr. Tan, or maybe through you, Mr. Mayor, to our town planner, Ms. Weens. So when I look at the chart of the rate comparison residential single detached, my understanding is the current, we charge $29,240 for a new building permit for a single dwelling, or single detached. And so the proposed rate increase is to go up to $37,707. And if you take it for the first year, it's $30,166. So when I subtracted those two, it's if you do the 80%, it's $926 additional development charge that will be charged to a person applying for a single dwelling unit. Is that, my understanding is correct, or no?
To Ms. Weens, is that? Director Planning?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, that would be correct. And then the second year, it would be the 85% charge plus the, any inflationary rate increase.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. So that to me seems reasonable for a new home going into the town of Pelham. I know Mr. Kaiser was putting out quite a few different numbers there, so I was just wanting to clarify that I had the nuts and bolts of it. Certainly, I think as we put in new residences and new communities and new subdivisions, that sort of thing, we do have to remember that in order to get to those, we need decent town roads and drainage and parks and that sort of thing for the children to be able to enjoy. So although we'll just use the skate park down in the pit, certainly that's not connected to a new subdivision, but the children from that subdivision are going to get to enjoy it, and so we need to keep those in good form. So I'm fine with, thank you for your report today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Let's go to Councillor Wink.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to the Director of Planning. Mr. Langendoon gave a presentation and asked about farm buildings and whether or not they would continue to be exempt. And I think that was the purpose of his presentation. So could you please clarify that?
To the Director of Planning, Ms. Weens.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, that is currently an existing exemption that is carried forward. As Mr. Tam indicated, all of the existing exemptions in our current development charge bylaw are carried forward in the proposed new one.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Wink. Any other, Councillor Kerr?
Yes, I appreciate the presentation, and I also appreciate Councillor Niznik and others identifying the fact of using a 5-year forward dollar value against this year's dollar values are really not appropriate. What we're looking at is based on the current legislation of the increase per year to go along. I think the incentive behind that is that people who have this would likely want to build sooner rather than later, which has been a definite difficulty in the town of Pelham in the number of actual building permits that people are coming in to get. They're getting zoning changes and sitting on them for prolonged periods of time. This may be the incentive to move them along. On the secondary side, there are a number of roads that are going to be heavily impacted by new developments that were never designed for the volume of traffic that they're going to carry into the future. So putting that burden on the existing person who lives on that road to say, well, I have to pay for all of the new roads going in front of my house so that people can get in a brand new subdivision is a little bit working backwards relative to the current ratepayer. We're all under severe duress relative to building and growth, and we recognize the town of Pelham is a place that has a significant number of developments that have just sat for a large number of years, which is very disappointing. I think this development charges approach is a positive one to encourage them to say, move ahead, don't move backwards, and don't sit on things for 20 years waiting for maybe some changes that are going to help. Our town is not a large population. The projected increase is not dramatic, but it's coming. But what we have noticed is that there's been a tremendous amount of vehicular traffic that is going higher and higher every year. And along with that is the degradation of existing infrastructures that occur with it. And some infrastructures that, because of the increased volume, need to meet newer standards for road travel that would not have happened had it not been this. So I appreciate the presentation from Mr. Tan. It's put it in perspective. I think that trying to equate the town of Pelham to the city of Welland is a little bit of apples and oranges, a city versus a town. Similarly, it'd be like trying to compare ourselves with the city of Niagara Falls, which is a totally different creature. So looking at things, I agree that it's a challenge, but asking existing ratepayers to suddenly bear a significant portion of development is not in my interest. Development comes because people want to build, and they want to build, and they will buy. So that's just my position. I just wanted to, as I say, I appreciate Councillor Niznik's framing the increases as to what they really are versus what the 5-year projection is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. If I may direct a question to to our Director of Planning, Ms. Wains. So Mr. Kaiser raised a point, and I have yet to ever know Mr. Kaiser to raise a non-valid point. So, he made the point that we're having this meeting, and then we're called back March the 6th with a bylaw. And Mr. Kaiser alluded to the fact that he doesn't think the right associations have had time to come forward and discuss this. So I guess my question to you is, do you agree with that assessment? And number two, is March 6th a set in stone date, or can we move that back, whether it be 2 council meetings a month or what have you, to allow discussion? I'd like to have your input on that, please, Ms. Weens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to bounce that question to the treasurer, Teresa Quinlan Murphy. She's the one who's been managing this project and can certainly speak to the timeframes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
To the Director of Treasury, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, right now, the March 6th date, that is in compliance with the legislative requirements. We've always, in the past, have had the bylaw 2 weeks after we've had the public meeting presentation. So we're just following what we have done in the past, and it is following the guidelines. I don't know if, Byron, if you want to add anything else?
To Mr. Tan?
No? Okay.
Yeah, no, through the mayor, as Ms. Murphy said, right now the bylaw is stated based on your timing. I do have to chat with staff just to see on any other dates potentially that may impact your bylaw. But as of right now, I believe the date was set just from our discussions dating back to December 20th, which again gives you almost 3 months. From when we released the background study.
Yes, and that's when, that's the date that I was thinking of, that really this has been out in the public sector for 3 months. So it's, yes, we're discussing it now, but it has been, we did begin the discussion 3 months ago. So thank you for that, Mr. Tan. Mr. CAO, joining us on Zoom, any words of wisdom from Ingersoll?
Well, to the extent I ever managed to hit wisdom. Look, I think that there's a better way to conceptualize this, which is to say there's no doubt that the town's met its statutory deadlines. There's been the legal opportunity to have input. But Mr. Kaiser's point, I think rephrased, is that historically the development industry would have been consulted more widely, or there'd been more sit-downs, that sort of thing. And I think that's a fair assessment and a fair statement on his part. There's been far less of that this time. What I'd suggest to council is, if you recall from Mr. Tan's presentation, is a really good job in 2 slides of showing the dramatic changes to the world of development charges over the past not quite 4 years. 4 major bills, and then I would say 2 minor ones, but however you want to count, there have been at least 4 dramatic legislative changes, which has forced this council and the previous council to look at its development charges bylaws on multiple occasions, because we've essentially had provisions changed for us by the province, and it's done that with very little consultation. So part of what we're doing here, we were obligated to make changes as a result of the cumulative net effect of those 4 bills, or 6, depending how you want to count. Really, I think the critical slide for council, and this was 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 into the presentation, that showed where Pelham will be relative to the other municipalities in Niagara. And if you pass these, in the immediate future, Pelham will have the highest development charges in Niagara, because those are just pending over in Lincoln. We don't know what Lincoln's final decisions will be. And that is or is not problematic. It is true that Wellands are a fraction of Pelham's. That is or is not problematic. Fundamentally, the question is, where do you want to position Pelham? And who should pay for growth? Those are the questions to be asked, and those were points that were touched on by a couple members of council, in talking about who pays for the road and the street. And, how much of that goes to existing users versus future residents who eventually become, existing users and existing residents. So have we done what we need to as far as consultation? Yes, we've checked every box. We passed the, if that's a law school test, we check every box. Great. Did we do as much consultation as has normally occurred? No. Are we responding to dramatic changes by His Majesty? Yes. And here we are. So I really commend to you, and maybe at some point if I stop talking, you can have on your screen again, Mr. Tan's, that chart showing where Pelham is and will be if we approve these. And it is true, we are sort of ahead of the curve, as I think we've been for the last 3 or 4 years on it in any number of files. We're getting a jump on our development charges yet again because basically we have to change them yet again. The question is, where should we position the community? I think it would be uncommon or bizarre for Pelham to have development charges that were in the lowest half of Niagara. Do you want them to be the highest in Niagara? I don't know. That is fundamentally a decision of council. The rest of it is details. We can argue Mr. Kaiser's points on behalf of, if we take him as being fairly representative of the development community in general, or if you look at the letter from the law firm on behalf of one specific other developer, generally speaking, they make the same point, which is to say we can quibble about which details should go into the development charges, and the items that go in create a financial target that is reflected in the rates, right? So the fewer things that go in, or the lower the percentage that is associated with growth, the less the development charge will be. And the higher the percentage, that results in a higher charge. It's a very simple, it's a mathematical computation, and Mr. Tan and his team I'm sure their mathematics are good. I'm sure those check out quite well. So the council, I'll stop talking now, but the real thing is you should take a look at that chart and see where Pelham is and where it will be if you approve these. And if you're comfortable with that, then you have a basis, an excellent report, analysis to support going forward with them as presented. If you're not comfortable with them, you should send this matter back for further analysis. That is the key. Everything else is just a technical detail. But the thing is, who should pay for development? What is the right split for Pelham, for current residents versus future? And beyond that, where do you want to place this community within Niagara? Is it good that it's more expensive to build here? No staff member can answer that question. That has to come from council. There are good reasons to look at it. There are very compelling cases, arguments on both sides of this, but you have an intellectually honest and rigorous product before you that has arrived at you in a lawful fashion. I would really look at that graph and say, does that seem right? If it feels right, you have a way forward. And if you have some concerns, then you should pause where you're going. I support the comments of Teresa Quinlan Murphy. Certainly, we've got here in an appropriate fashion, but do you like what's being recommended? And that is for the 7 of you alone. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for those thoughts, Mr. CAO. After hearing our CAO, is there any other comments? And I will go to Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I've heard what my fellow councillors have said, and I agree with Councillor Niznik and Councillor Kerr but new development should pay for new development, which includes an excellent report and indication of where our community sits according to Mr. Tam. I agree the position of our community is where I think our community residents believe it should be, and therefore I'm very comfortable with the report that we have, and it will be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Councilor Nesbitt.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor, just a question for Mr. Tan. So I'm not sure if there's a discrepancy or I just don't read the chart properly. So the survey of DC rates residential were on the chart that our CEO referred us back to. So the calculated measure there is over $60,000. What's the black line there, part of that? Oh, that's lower tier charges? Upper tier charges. So would a development charge be 62,000 or 64,000 in there?
Yeah, so the calculated charge through the mayor, excuse me, is about 63,000 when factoring in the town of Pelham as well as the region of Niagara, and as well as the education development charges as well. So the school boards also implement a DC. You can barely see it on there, but it is a slight green at the very top sliver of every single bar graph.
So the gray part is our charge, the lower tier charge, and then the gold part is the same for everybody. That's the regional charge?
Correct.
Okay, that's why the discrepancy. Thank you for clarifying. Apologize.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's critical for us to take a look at the fact that the number of other municipalities that are reviewing development charges. So taking this graph as static but only changing Pelham may not be reflective of what's going to happen among a large number of these other municipalities in terms of the total dollar values that are going to change. Being aware and familiar with other people who are representatives in other communities where they're having these similar discussions that we are, they are all aware of the impact of the provincial legislation and have recognized that they have to do something to try and put themselves in a positive position. I think Mr. Tan highlighted that we don't want to get into a negative situation of reserves relative to development charges, because that just turns around. We have big things coming ahead that there are a lot of things above and beyond just new development that are coming to the forefront. But new development requires improved services, et cetera, for all those people. And the mechanism of getting it to them is an expense that comes and has to travel over lands that have been previously grown, but you'll get changes. So as with Councillor Hildebrand, I'm supportive of where we're going with this. I think this report hits it. I think the fact that it was identified at the 80% level, what the true increase in year one would be, we're looking at the costs increasing. And as many people have said, development charges have not kept pace with the actual hard costs of providing the services that have gone into place. And always it comes back to the brunt of all the taxpayers to make up the difference when we see that. So in a way, all the taxpayers are going to wind up contributing at some point to this. We're just doing our best to try and crystal ball. And so I'm in support of the report as is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Eckert.
Yes, just one question. I'm not sure who it would go to, but maybe Ms. Quinlan Murphy or Ms. Weens, I'm not sure. But it seems to me that the history of our town dealing with development is that there's always been a pretty good relationship between the building community and the town, and we seem to have not many challenges to the OLT, et cetera, like that, and a lot of that comes from cooperation. So I was a little disappointed to hear that there wasn't the consultation ahead of time with the industry. So my question is, if we did not pass this bylaw on the next date, what's the downside to that? Is there a penalty for that? Is there something we're going to lose out on? What's...
To the Director of Finance.
Oh, she lost a piece.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, I could respond to that. This bylaw does not have an expiry date, so we can defer it, like delay the passing of the bylaw from March the 6th, there will be no penalty. So the only thing I do want to just emphasize what the mayor said earlier, that the DC study has been out for 60 days. So the opportunity was there for, for the developers to come forth earlier.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to any other counselor, I just want to say that I will not support this. I think that I think the increase is more than is warranted. I'm very close to someone who built a house in rural Pelham, and I think we reached a point myself that I think the increase is too high. I can't put I don't know what the procedure is here, if I can put a motion, but I've heard other council members talk. It seems like the majority are indeed happy, satisfied with the report. I just think that sooner or later we've got to come to a ceiling. The fact that we are the second highest in the peninsula, it'll actually be quite a bit if you look at this one figure. Yeah, anyway, if anybody was to put forward a motion to look at a different percentage increase, I would definitely go with that. If it's the feeling of council not to do that, then so be it. But no, I just think that this is a little too high, and we don't have to be, this isn't something that we want to be leading the pack in, and those are my thoughts. Thank you. Any other counselor have any other comments? Not seeing any. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that will close the public portion of the meeting pursuant to the Development Charges Act. Having heard all the comments at this public meeting, it's now closed. Council would urge the public to submit their comments in writing prior to Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. Council consideration of the development charge bylaw is now scheduled to occur on March 6, 2024, where council can have further discussion. I do have a series of resolutions here to present to the committee, and as a reminder to myself, not the committee, we only need a mover for these resolutions to be considered. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Wink that the committee recommend that council receive the development charges bylaw overview presentation by Watson and Associates Economics Limited, and that the committee recommend council receive the Pelham study dated December 20th, 2023, prepared by Watson and Associates, and the committee recommends to council to direct staff to proceed with the preparation of a development charges bylaw for consideration by council at the March 6, 2024 meeting. For discussion and vote.
Yep. Further discussion on this? Not seeing any. Councillor Eckert?
Sorry, I was a little late to get my hand up there, but although I'm not necessarily against the I appreciate the report, and I think it's a great report, and I'm not necessarily against the increases and where, the responsibility of who should pay for new infrastructure. I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just wondering if we need to pass this bylaw at the next meeting, and if it can't be delayed to allow some further discussion. That's my point. So.
Okay. Thank you. To the clerk, would Councillor Eckert put a motion forward to?
Oh, we have a motion on.
Wait, I'm sorry. Let me go to we'll go to the CAO, please.
So you're just closing out a meeting where you're not sitting as council, you're sitting as committee, so that you could hear things and not make any sort of binding decisions. Right now, on March 6th, there'll be something as we go forward. There'll be an item on an agenda that will allow you to sit as council. It will be on a council agenda. And that's a great time between now and then anyone who wants to bring a motion can provide us notice of motion, right? And staff will, of course, assist you in drafting that. So you can provide notices of motion to each, and it doesn't matter if we get 5 or 6 or 7. They can be conflicting, of course, but that's a really good way for you to signal to each other that you do or that you have concerns, or not, as the case may be. But you'll be able to have a discussion, demand staff reports, pass the thing on the 6th, any number of outcomes. When you're sitting as a full council and you have 2 weeks between now and then to plan, to think about how you'd like to proceed, or if you already know how you'd like to proceed through the notice of motion tool, which is always the elected official's best friend to signal his or her intentions. That's strongly what I'd endorse. I think the clerk has us on a good path right now as far as wrapping up the official meeting where you're not sitting as council, so that we can go back to the main meeting where you will be sitting as council on the other agenda items today. But I would strongly encourage you to consider it should you have concerns. Notices of motion are probably the best way to go. And as always, we're happy to provide supportive assistances in that regard.
Councilor
Thank
Eckert?
you.
Thank you. So I'd lean to the clerk to give me a hand signal when I could make that notice of motion.
Yeah, we do have a public meeting and a process, so the notice of motion would come between this meeting and the next.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we do have that motion just to receive the overview and accept it and direct staff to bring a bylaw for consideration on the table for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? All those against? Motion carries.
Thank you. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Hildebrand that the committee receive the verbal presentations made by the public today listed on the agenda, and the committee receive the written correspondence as noted in the meeting.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Thank you. Now, the last resolution, I have a motion moved by Councillor Eckhart that the committee rise from the Committee of the Whole. Public meeting under the Development Charges Act is now adjourned and reconvene as council.
Okay, all those in favor? None opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if you want to break at this point or whether you want to travel through the agenda a little further before we have a break.
You know what, let's take 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready to go, Mr. Mayor, whenever
Okay.
you're ready to reconvene.
Thank you. Those just joining us, we finished off one meeting. We're now into our regular council meeting, and I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're on agenda item number 8. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wink and seconded by Councillor Kerr. Be resolved that the following minutes be adopted as printed and circulated and read. SC-01/2023, the special council meeting muzzle order appeal hearing from January 31st, 2024. 2-4?
Yeah, not 2-3.
2-4. Thank you. Working on time travel. The second one is C-03/2024, regular council meeting of February 7th, 2023, or 24. Thank you, Councillor Eckhart.
Just trying to show you on the last seat.
After viewing these minutes, does any councillor have any omissions or additions that have to be made? Not seeing any. In that case, we'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving now to item number 9. This is the item, if any council member wishes to lift a consent agenda item, they may now do so.
Okay, thank you. After viewing the consent agenda list, is there any councillor that wishes to lift an item? Not seeing any, Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving to agenda item number 10, I have a motion moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Eckhart. Be it resolved that the consent agenda items listed on the February 21st, 2024 council agenda be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. To you for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Again, any further discussion on the consent agendas? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. To you, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving now, we have scheduled a closed session meeting. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Niznik, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the next portion of the meeting be closed to the public in order to consider the following. Advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. One item, contract and agreement. To you for discussion.
Okay, any discussion? I don't see any. All those in favor? Motion carries. We will now be going in camera.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just give us a minute to clear the council chambers and stop the stream. We're ready to go again. We're good to go.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm going to turn to the clerk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So returning to open session, I have a motion moved by Councillor Eckhart and seconded by Councillor Kerr. Be it resolved the council adjourn the in-camera session and the council do now rise with a report with instructions to follow at the end of the second closed meeting.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving now to item 14.2.1. I have a motion moved by Councillor Olson and seconded by Councillor Kerr. Be it resolved that council receive the memo 2024-0052 entitled Town of Pelham 2024 RCW User Fees and Charges Amendments for Information, and that council direct staff to prepare an amendment to the town's fees and charges bylaw to include the Centennial Park Tennis and Pickleball Court, key fobs for deposit fee of $50, remove from the senior membership fee of $50, and amend the summer ice season date from April 1st to August 1st for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on this item from any council member. Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Recreation. Yes, I will be approving the recommendation you have there. However, I went back to my notes back in December, and my notes were copious with a lot of items that were not addressed there. And I'm just going to read my notes from last time. I hate to repeat myself, but I think it's valuable because I'm hoping that we'll have an answer of when we're going to be having a more fulsome report in this area. And here are my comments that I made on the 20th of December. It is worth exploring the potential of distinguishing between residential and non-residential usage fees for the MCC, which is entirely supported by the local tax dollar by residents. It's worth considering whether towns should continue to offer a discount for seniors or whether it would make sense to simply have child and adult rates. The seniors that are using our facilities are largely. Let me get at this again. I'm falling into a trap here.
You look like you're copying the clerk. So.
Well, I didn't want to say that. The seniors that are using our services largely have the income to support paying adult fees. Staff should review the underlying hydro utility usage and the related fees for our outdoor facilities and social lighting. As we're not recovering the real costs, and the towns should be equitable across all sports. Baseball, for instance, pays $13 per hour. Soccer pays $30 per hour. Going over our charges, actual charges for 22, we don't have the 23 charges calculated yet. But for instance, the ballpark and concession charge for those lights was $2,054. Soccer was $629. So obviously, baseball seems to be getting a real deal. I've counted the number of lights at Harold Black, and basically they're the same. So I'm not sure how we ever came up with those rates, but I think that needs to be addressed on all our fields. And in conclusion, I said I'm aware that planning staff are going to be reporting on the MCC facility usage coming in March. I thought a more in-depth report would be coming at this time, but I understand that there's a lot of work that has to be going in to come up with this answer. So to the director, the answer to the question I have is, when's the future report coming?
To the Director of Rec, Ms. Van Maven's way.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, there is a detailed report that will be coming prior to the 2025 setting of the user fees for 2025. And staff will be working on it. It will probably be coming in August, and we've already started to do some work on it.
Thank you. I was hoping it wouldn't be December.
No.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Kerr?
Yes, just a quick clarification. So functionally, senior memberships were eliminated, so I assume a senior is now just an adult membership for the pickleball courts and the tennis. And the secondary side is, how do we know that everyone uses them are a member at those two facilities? Recognizing there's a really big number of people that come from outside the town of Pelham and utilize it.
To the Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of answers to that, couple of questions there. Last year was our first year with these rates, and we opened mid-season. That's why it was a $50 fee. So we're just cleaning that up. And last year was our first year, and we implemented a fob system in both of the courts. So the members come, get their fobs, and they use their fobs to get into the gate. It's not foolproof, as we all know. And when staff, they are in the park often, and if they see the gate propped, we just go over and we explain, you're hurting yourselves because you've paid, but you're letting your friends in, not paying. And that normally, it basically, it police itself, the selves. I mean, a couple of weeks ago when the sun was shining and it was 60 degrees, people were jumping the fence. So it's not foolproof, but we do the best we can. And in this year, we have found that we need to implement a deposit on the fobs. The fobs are not cheap. And with the deposit, it's an easy refund to be implemented. So that's why we have a $50 deposit on the fobs.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah, thank you. I recognize all you need is one person with a fob and everybody gets in, is kind of the situation. And I guess following the media, pickleball is the fastest growing sport across Canada. So numbers are only going to increase dramatically. And I guess I'm wondering if in many cases there's people that are utilizing the facilities that don't realize that there's fees associated with it. That somehow, I mean, if I was a person and said, hey, you want to play pickleball on Thursday, they're from out of town, they don't know anything about it, they show up, they play, they have no concept that there was a fee because the person who had the fob says, well, I can get you in. I guess that's sort of where I recognize we can't have a gatekeeper at these facilities because that just goes against the thing, but you could have it would be, I guess my question is that if 70% of the people are actually paying 50%, I mean, we had this group actually come in and ask us for a brand new paved parking lot. if anybody remembers last year's budget request, suddenly saying, well, there was dust blowing across. I would be intrigued to know how many of that particular group actually understood that there were costs associated with it. So that's just an observation, and having been there, I will admit I'm the kind of guy who goes on corporate golf memberships and have a tendency to go places because it doesn't cost me because somebody else paid for it.
Okay, thank you. Back to the director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just if I remember correctly, we did sell about 180 memberships. So we are, I mean, if that drastically drops, we will police it more often. But we were satisfied with the memberships that we sold, so.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying you're getting pretty good compliance then? Excellent. Thank you. Any other discussions? Okay, not seeing any. All those, ready to call the vote? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, not seeing anyone opposed, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now moving on to item 14.2.2. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wink and seconded by Councillor Hildebrand that Council receives report 2024-48 for information as it pertains to file number OP-AM 02-2023 and AM-05-2023, and that Council directs planning staff to prepare the necessary official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for Council's consideration at the next regular meeting of Council. To you for discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion on this recommendation by any councillor? Not seeing any. Mr. Clerk, I will now call the vote. All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving to item 14.2.3, I have a motion moved by Councillor Eckhart and seconded by Councillor Niznik. Be it resolved that Council receive report 2024-0044, recommendation report housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment for information, and the Council direct planning staff to prepare the necessary bylaw for Council's consideration in accordance with the summary attached hereto as Appendix A. To you for discussion and vote.
Thank you. On this item, any further discussion from council? Not seeing any. Call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving to item 14.2.4, I have a motion moved by Councillor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Eckhart. Be resolved that Council receive report 2024-0038, the 2024 water and wastewater budgets for information, and that Council approve the recommendations from the Committee of the Whole meeting held on February 7th, 2024, for Council to approve the 2024 water and wastewater budget, increasing the water rate by 6.5% and the wastewater rate by 9.5%. To you for discussion and vote.
Okay, thank you. Any council member have any discussions on these rates? Not seeing any. I'll call the vote. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now moving to item 14.2.5. I have a motion moved by Councillor Olson and seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that Council receive the report 2023-0264, the MCC Ice Rink Optimization Report, and that Council provide direction to staff on the following option. Now to discussion for determination of option and vote.
Okay, thank you. As council, you've seen, we've got option 1, 2, and 3. Council 4 is not, option 4 is not recommended by staff. So the discussion on the available options, 1 through 3. Any? We'll go to Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the report. I appreciate that. I'm going to be making a deferral on approval of this report. And let me explain the reason why. I think the ice usage is part of an overall plan that we need to review. My view of the Meridian Center and the ice rinks is probably different from what I've seen in the staff report, but maybe it's the same. It seems to me that the vision portrayed in the report seems to me it's the two rinks are just two rinks. To me, that I think we have to create a different or a bigger vision and mission for that facility. I like to see it as a diverse entertainment complex where sports, arts, business, social, and educational opportunities are provided. I look at the Meridian Center in St. Catharines and what's happening there, and my family is very familiar with the gentleman who runs that facility and all the opportunities that they had. On the Super Bowl day, they rented the facility out to a large church organization to start off the day. You know, they can hold up 6,000 people, and it's amazing that they rented the facility to one of those organizations, because there's a lot of local churches that are so big that they need a big facility like that to have an entertainment. My kids are talking about the Bare Naked Ladies coming up to, and what the price of the tickets are for those. But I think our Meridian Center, if we really look at it, could develop and be part of that entertainment world. I see people from this region going even to Europe to see different shows or different things or different events. And these people from our area are doing this. Like my wife's friends, I'm surprised where they go to have entertainment and what they'll spend on entertainment. So I think there's a big opportunity here. And I know that we said we wouldn't buy ice coverings. And I know that I've talked to the gentleman who runs the Meridian Center in St. Catharines. And, you know, we talked about a vision and a thing that we could accomplish here. And the reason why I'm going to put forward a deferral is because I think we have to have a larger vision as a town. Because if we keep on doing what we've always done, we're going to keep on getting what we've always gotten. And it's good, but I think there's better out there, and there's more things available for the Meridian Center. So I'm not sure whether the rest of council sees it that way. I mean, we could rent the ice all summer, but I think even if we rent the ice all summer, I think with ice coverings, all kinds of different things occur. I know that's not a staff recommendation. You know, that doesn't fit with them. But there are rinks that have ice covering available. I know that past council, one of the things we talked about is the basketball courts. That basketball court that we have over there, that's an NBA-sized basketball court. You know, would some of these offshoot clubs be willing to have a camp there? And you see all these kind of dreams and visions, and I think we have to go back and take another look at it further than just voting on it today, whether we're going to have ice in the summer, not ice in the summer, or those kind of things. So that's basically my wild thoughts for the day on the Meridian Center and what we should be doing. I'm all in for a greater vision and mission, and I'm all in for having entertainment events in there and having all these other kinds of things. Yes, it's going to take some coordination and planning, but I think that all that stuff is available, and there are groups that can accommodate that kind of thing. That's my vision and dream for the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, do you want to put the defer, I'll turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would suggest that we've got notice of the deferral, but it might be advantageous to have council discuss the resolution before the deferral, because once we have a deferral, there's no more debate on the matter.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Clerk. So we will continue on with this discussion and then see where it leads to. Councillor Olson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, I guess I'm hoping for a more comprehensive report as well, because I think there's more that can be done there. I agree with Councillor Hildebrand. We talked about this before. What influences me greatly is the fact that we've got this. The busier we get, the greater our contribution decreases, the bigger loss we have, and that was what came out of the budget process. And we're building something here that continually goes up, the loss goes up, the use of the revenue goes up a little bit, and then the costs go up quite a bit more. And I'd like to have an answer for that, what that means, because that's a kind of a thing like a death spiral for something when it happens like that. I was looking for an analysis of the contribution margin, and speaking directly to this one here, this motion, item 2, is a non-starter for me because it takes out the lacrosse, the club there, and I don't want to see that happen. I mean, they're getting started, and it's an organization that I think has got real future, and you go down there and you see it's just yet another one of the programs that RCW has come up with that is a real success, and I don't want to see that go, especially when it's youth involved. And you know, and even on the weekend there, I had a lot of people expressing their appreciation for the MCC and what a fine building it is, and how big a part of their lives as team sports is for their families. And they went on to talk about the baseball and the light standards and things that we're putting up. But I think we really have to look at some of the charges and some of the items that could be sequenced a little bit better and maybe organized a little better, because sequencing is, if you take everything that comes your way, you're going to have a problem with sequencing all the time. So, you know, I appreciate that the work that's been done, and the fact that RCW takes this on, and they try and include everybody, and they do a great job of doing that. And you just have to go down on the weekend and see what happened there. It was like 3,000 people showed up for the Monday event, I understand, and it looked like they all showed up at 11 o'clock to me. So, but you know, it's a great thing, and I think we're going to be making decisions about parking, and I was hoping that we would have some more information that would influence us on what we do with parking, because that's going to come as a pretty significant cost, and I'm not sure that we have the answer here. It's part of the answer probably, but I think there's more work to be done here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. If I may, before I go back to council, I'd just like to say that I think it's a waste of an ice surface that you can play lacrosse on a concrete area that doesn't have refrigeration underneath of it. And there are other arenas in the peninsula that don't have summer ice, and I'll just leave it at that. When we've got refrigeration under the floor ready to go, if we had gone on with this discussion, I would have had no problem going for option 2, but that's just my own thing. Go ahead, Councillor.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, I would take you on an outside lacrosse or inside lacrosse, one-on-one. So I am undefeated.
Yeah, I'll decline that offer right now. I'll go, Councillor Kerr.
I support Councillor Olson's comment relative to lacrosse, and it's a very interesting comment where you talk about, and I did play outdoors. And actually, when there was the old arena or floor space down in the pit, and let me just say, in the middle of summer, we'd almost died from the heat as players, which was awful. The secondary thing was we also played indoor arenas in St. Catharines, one in particular that had such horrific humidity issues, they've actually had to cancel games because the floors became incredibly slippery and wet. They too had cooling things, but this was coming back to the potential of the facility. Lacrosse is an interesting creature. As I said, I played it. I have friends. I have one fellow, an extremely good friend, who wound up going to the U.S. on a field lacrosse scholarship and is actually still playing seniors lacrosse at 65 and traveling around the U.S. playing and doing quite well. So I wish I was as fit as he was. But relative to the ice thing, I agree. I think we need a more comprehensive report of potentials, options, cost per unit. When I see things in general numbers, it doesn't somewhat come back to me what is the additional cost of labor that gets attached to it as well. Every time we add something, there's always costs that have to be attached to it to a greater degree. And we all have heard the comment, budget high and pay low. So in other words, assume you'll make less and assume your costs are always way more. And that holds true for building anything or operating anything. We all know that. So I have no qualms relative to Councillor Hildebrand's request for something a little more comprehensive. I'm willing to go down that route. I can't support the option of either full-time ICE or even losing the 2 months of ICE at this point. I don't have enough information to really say I would be comfortable with that.
So I guess it goes without saying then that if we go for a deferral, then we stay with option one, obviously. We leave everything as it is. Is correct, the director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would just, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to make the comment, the season's coming on.
Yeah.
We are right now booking and, registrations are had. I appreciate everything you're saying and staff can come back with another report, but I would ask that be implemented in 2025, if that's the case, because it would be very difficult. I mean, we can adjust everything accordingly, but to not make any decision right now would be a difficult situation.
Yes, exactly. Council, go ahead, Councilor Wade. I'm sorry.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that we have to make a decision on this right now. What our future looks like with respect to the MCC, we can have a report later on. To be blunt, we're not going to get bare naked ladies coming in there. The band.
Yeah, you are talking about the band, okay.
For a capacity of hopefully 2,000 people, the ticket prices would have to be through the roof. They would. And, there's other things that can be done, but really, what we've got to look at is we've got a home show coming up. We've got Pelham Art Festival coming up in April. We got lacrosse playing in there this year that I'm not ready to kick them to the curb. And in addition to that, we've got the summer camps that are utilizing this facility. So if we put ice in there, none of those things can happen. So I understand that there's more to talk about. I don't agree with the deferral. I agree that we should be talking about the future of the facility and what else we can do with the facility at another time. But right now, we're dealing with something that has to be dealt with immediately. And quite frankly, I'm fine with option one. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. And I agree with you. I think the clock is ticking, as the director mentioned. So whether I think another report is on the will of council. Can we expand the use? But right now, I think we have to discuss 1, 2, or 3. Councilor Wink has just gone with option 1. Further discussion. Councilor Nesna.
Yes, thank you. Just comments, no questions. So at first glance, certainly when you first read it, you think, oh, let's go with option 3, retain ice year-round for both ice pads, because, we are working with a facility that is in a loss situation. We're losing money on it, or I guess not breaking even yet. But on the other hand, we're providing wonderful service to our residents in the town. And offsetting that with tax dollars, so that's fine. But sure, my first instinct was let's go get them ice year round, jack up those summer rates, and makes lots of profit. But then on the other hand, we also have these. On Monday, there I was at the MCC and sitting across from the lacrosse booth, who they've got their registration, they had their gold up, they had their green up, they were all pumped accepting registrations. And so it is a sport that is growing. The Rock is very popular in terms of professional box lacrosse. So I think we would be short-sighted to put an end to the Pelham lacrosse. I think we need to support them this year for sure, as well as the home show and the art show. I do think that those two events could be maybe used. I'm not sure if the gyms would be big enough for those to be run, but looking at something of that for the future. But for this year, I too would be supporting option one. Just leave it status quo and then do some research. I support Councillor Hildebrand in saying, you know, maybe we need to get that vision a little larger to bring in some more robust money-making events. That would be terrific. So, but for this year, for this recommendation here, I would be supporting option one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eckert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with all the councillors that are looking at option one. I think it's too late in the year, as they've said, to make some changes to these organizations. But I'm also looking at, you know, the attractiveness to keeping the ice in all year is there's clearly $140,000 in revenue that is gained at the Doulaban Arena, keeping the ice in every year. However, I think if you put ice in the other arena, I don't think we're going to double that to 280. I think what's going to happen is you're going to lose because you've got two rinks, so it's going to shift over. And so I think personally opinion that the Doulaban revenue would drop, the Cipitor would come up, and would probably even out to where it is. But then we've got all that cost associated with running the ice surface. And the downside to me is all the activities that we would lose in there, plus we're losing the opportunity as constable, sorry, I've promoted you, Bob. Councillor Hildebrand, you know, it's maybe eliminating this opportunity to look at future uses of the MCC if we vote to keep ice in year round. So I would be promoting and voting for option number one.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other discussion on this side? Go ahead, Councillor.
I agree with my fellow councillors. I wasn't trying to change anything for this year, to be honest with you. I was looking at a future vision. So
okay.
Whether the deferral had nothing to do, it had to do with making a decision whether we change what we're doing now versus what we're going to do in the future.
Excellent. And while you have the floor, what would your option be?
Well, my option would be option one.
Okay.
But next council meeting, I'm going to be talking about the energy costs at the MCC, because it will surprise you. The fact is that when we had the COVID session, it cost us more to run the MCC when we had COVID going on and we didn't have any ice in the rink than when we have ice in the rink. It's very expensive to run that HVAC system, extremely expensive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other comments, we'll go, it looks to me like option one is the preferred, so I'll put option one on. So all those in favor of option one, please raise your hand. And, okay, all those against option one? Okay, option one carries. Mr. Clerk, is that good?
We have the vote, sorry, I was meditating. So.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on now to item 17, presentation and consideration of bylaws. I have a motion moved by Councillor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass the same. And that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. Bylaw 08-2024, being a bylaw to appoint the Niagara Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Humane Society Animal Services officers to enforce the Town of Pelham animal bylaws. Bylaw 03-2024, being a bylaw to regulate the operation of cemeteries by the Corporation of the Town of Pelham and to repeal bylaw number 3012, brackets 2019. Bylaw 09-2024, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw 4481, brackets 2022, as amended to rezone lands located at 61 Port Robertson Road. And bylaw 10-2024, being a bylaw to deem part of a registered plan of subdivision not to be a registered plan of subdivision 801 Canberra Road. Bylaw 11-2024, being a bylaw to exempt the blocks as listed in the bylaw from part lot control, Saffron Meadows Phase 3. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion and vote.
Okay, thank you. Any councillor have any further discussion on this item? Oh, Councillor Nesnick.
Yes, thank you. So just through you, Mr. Mayor, I wonder if our town planner is expand a little bit on bylaw 10/2024, the number 4, with the part of a registration of subdivision not to be part of a registered subdivision. That's the corner of Canberra and Maple, I understand, where the gas or the auto shop is.
That's
I looked it up yesterday because I couldn't quite figure it out. Thank you.
To the Director of Planning, Ms. Weiss.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. So you're quite correct. It's the corner of Maple and Canberra. It's Clarence's auto repair shop. The business currently occupies 2 lots on a plan of subdivision. You really don't know where the lot lines are. You can't tell that from the ground. So what we're doing with this approval of this bylaw is to deem those 2 lots not to be in a plan of subdivision, and they would become 1 lot. The owner of that property wants to put an additional garage bay on the lands and do an expansion to their business. So in order to do that, so they don't cross property lines, this is the easiest way to do that. So it's allowing for some future growth on that property.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Kerr?
Just to follow up for Councilor Nusnick, the owner of the property lives above the office building in the other part, so it makes total sense for them to amalgamate so they can expand the garage. They're actually, I'll call it one of the Fenwick success stories. They've out. Another garage actually closed at the end of Maple Street and Highway 20 and is up for sale. So they're a thriving business that continues to expand, and it's great to see in the center of the community, personally.
Yep, thank you for those comments, Councillor. Any other comments on the bylaws? If not, call the vote. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion passes. To the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving now to item number 18, Councillor Eckhart did provide us an indication that he wanted to bring forward a notice of motion for the delay of consideration of the development charges bylaw from March 6th. So this would be his opportunity to provide council with notice of that motion that then can be presented to council at our next meeting.
Exactly. And Councillor, just on a notice of motion, it's just bare bones. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you for muzzling me. Yeah, I just want to put forward a notice of motion that I will be moving to for the consideration of the vote on March 6th to the next council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. To the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That moves us to number 19 on the agenda. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Eckhart and seconded by Councillor Niznik. Be it resolved that the next portion of the meeting be closed to the public in order to consider the following. Proposed or pending acquisition or disposal of land by the municipality or local board, 1 item, property located in Ward 1, and 2, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, labor relations or employee negotiations, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. We have 2 items. Both are non-union. for you for discussion and vote.
Yep, thank you. Any discussion? Obviously not. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion passes. We will now move in camera.
Yeah, so just give us 1 second now to stop.
Oh, there we go. That's looking good.
I'd say feeling groovy, but I generally try to not lie to any of you.
Oh. Still a little on the sore side? We're up.
Yeah, it's a mix of a leave and Tylenol. It'll be all right ultimately, but yeah, it's still fresh.
Excellent.
We are back in open session, Mr. Mayor. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Wink and seconded by Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that council adjourn this closed session and do rise with a report, and that the Chief Administrative Officer be and is hereby authorized to undertake the directions as provided during the in-camera meeting of February 21st, 2024.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor? No, I see none opposed. Motion carries.
Item number 21, the confirmatory bylaw. I have a motion moved by Councillor Niznik and seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, and third time and passed, being bylaw number 12-2024 to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of council for the town of Pelham at its regular meeting held on the 21st day of February 2024.
Thank you. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Item number 22, I have a motion moved by Councillor Eckhart and seconded by Councillor Councillor Hildebrand. Be it resolved that this regular meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for March 6, 2024 at 9 a.m.
All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.